At 11:17 a. on July 31st, 1944, the summer heat hung thick and suffocating over the hedgerows of Normandy, making the mud and amplifying the scent of burnt cordite. Staff Sergeant Frank Kaczmarek, a man who looked more like a grease monkey than a tank commander, lay prone in the dirt, 3 feet from the mangled left drive sprocket of his M4A3 Sherman. The sound that dominated the air was not the crack of German machine guns, but the low, accelerating growl of a heavy engine, the unmistakable signature of a Panzer V, the deadly Panther. Kaczmarek wasn't worried about the shrapnel slicing the air or the dirt spraying from nearby impacts. He was consumed by physics. His tank, nicknamed the Wrench, was immobilized a 30-ton coffin stuck 100 yards from a key crossroads outside Percy. 10 minutes earlier, an 88mm shell had grazed the sprocket housing, jamming the drive and throwing off the track tension. Standard procedure, according to the Ordnance Manual, dictated 3 hours and heavy recovery equipment to execute this specific field repair. Kaczmarek knew he had closer to 40 seconds before the German tank rounded the corner of the dense bocage. The shrapnel fragments, tiny, razor-sharp pieces of steel, had to be cleared from the sprocket teeth before the track could be remounted. He used the hook end of a massive pipe wrench, pulling out twisted metal shards while Staff Sergeant Dale, Sparky Harrison, the gunner, laid desperate fire into the hedgerow with the coaxial 30 caliber machine gun, trying to buy fractions of a second. This insane level of frontline maintenance was not just Kaczmarek's specialty, it was the foundation of his entire unit. They were the unwanted, the improvisers, the mechanics the Army had tried to court-martial before realizing their unique value. Kaczmarek had been a problem since basic training. He wasn't disrespectful. He was simply incapable of respecting incompetence, especially mechanical incompetence. Born in a grimy industrial section of Detroit, he spent his teenage years pulling engines from wrecked cars and rebuilding them faster and cleaner than any professional shop. While the Army trained soldiers to operate the machines, Kaczmarek was trained to resurrect them. When a standard issue maintenance kit proved inadequate, Kaczmarek simply stole tools, manufactured custom parts from scrap, or welded additional plating onto critical stress points, all violations of field doctrine. The Army bureaucracy saw insubordination. Colonel Marcus Hammer Thorne, commanding a brigade in the 3rd Armored Division, saw genius. Thorne was known for his brutal realism. He understood that America's advantage lay not just in mass production, but in maintainability. While German tanks were marvels of precision engineering, they required specialized facilities for basic repairs. The Sherman, despite its thinner armor, was designed to be modular and relatively simple. Kaczmarek and his cohort, a collection of convicted joyriders, ex-factory workers, and draft-dodging farm mechanics, were Thorne's answer to German superiority. They were officially designated the 304th Provisional Field Maintenance Platoon, but the line soldiers called them the Junkyard Dogs. Their training wasn't done on ranges. It was done in actual salvage yards. They learned to strip an entire suspension assembly off a derelict Sherman in under 5 minutes, replacing damaged bogies with a crude yet terrifying speed. Thorne's philosophy was simple. A destroyed tank is a problem for logistics. A broken tank that can be fixed under fire is a weapon. The Junkyard Dogs developed a complete manual of unauthorized modifications, the Gray Book. It included techniques like welding additional sandbags or scavenged German helmet shells onto ammunition racks for extra internal protection, a direct violation of safety protocols, and crucially for Kaczmarek right now, the high-speed track retensioning technique. They used custom, reinforced track guides, often fashioned from the scrap metal of destroyed enemy vehicles, that allowed track repairs to be cut down from hours to minutes. The official requirement for replacing a damaged track segment was 30 minutes in a secure area. Kaczmarek had promised Thorne he could do the entire operation in 60 seconds or less in a combat scenario. He'd never had to prove it under the muzzle of an incoming 75mm cannon. Now, back in the present, the earth vibrating under the weight of the closing Panther, Kaczmarek spat dirt from his mouth. He had cleared the last chunk of metal. The sprocket was ready, but the pressure had twisted the track's stabilizer pin, meaning the track section would only slide into place if he used immense leverage. Sparky, how much time? Kaczmarek yelled over the shuddering engine noise. 30 seconds until he sees us, Sergeant. We got visual range now. Harrison screamed back, exhausting the last belt in his machine gun. Kaczmarek grabbed a long, heavy steel bar he demodified specifically for this job, a tool that would never be found in a standard arming kit. He knew the German tank was now less than 60 yards away, and if they didn't get this track reseated in the next few breaths, the wrench and its crew would be just another statistic in the bloody fight for the Bocage. He jammed the bar into the track assembly, using the ground as a fulcrum, preparing to attempt the impossible leverage. He just needed 40 seconds. 11 hours, 17 minutes, and 40 seconds a.m. Kaczmarek gritted his teeth, his muscles screaming against the resistance of the twisted track guide. He was using the long steel bar, a non-standard length of hardened tool steel, as a crowbar against the sheer bulk of the 30-ton vehicle. The sound of the Panther was now a grating roar, tearing through the quiet afternoon like a predator. Inside the wrench, Private First Class James O'Malley, the driver, had the engine revving high, ready to move the moment Kaczmarek signaled. The standard practice in this scenario was for the rest of the crew to bail out and cover the sergeant. But the Junkyard Dogs operated differently. They stuck with the machine, trusting the mechanic more than the doctrine. Kaczmarek jammed the bar deeper. He felt the critical component, the stabilizer, pin groan. He risked bending the entire lever, but he gave one final desperate heave, fueled by the primal fear that the Panther would appear before the track seated. Crack clunk. The track segment snapped back into place on the sprocket teeth. It was an ugly fix, relying on brute force and Kaczmarek's custom-welded track guide to hold the tension. But it was fixed. The entire procedure, from diagnosis to reseating the segment, had taken exactly 42 seconds. He ripped the bar out of the assembly, throwing it into the dirt, and scrambled back through the driver's hatch. O'Malley, go. Full throttle, reverse 20 yards, then hard right. Kaczmarek shouted, slamming the hatch shut just as the atmosphere outside dissolved into chaos. 11 hours, 18 minutes, and 25 seconds a. The Panther, bearing the tactical designation PZ, VAUSFG, rolled out of the tree line. It was massive, its sloped frontal armor reflecting the afternoon sun. It saw the American tank reversing a moving target, but an obvious one. The German gunner didn't hesitate. The 75mm KWK-42 L-70 long-barreled cannon barked fire, launching a high-velocity projectile. Kaczmarek felt the tank shudder violently, but not from the impact. O'Malley, reacting to Kaczmarek's non-standard command, had initiated a violent pivot. The German shell, intended for the center mass of the wrench, instead sliced through the thin wooden frame of a farm cart 10 feet behind them, exploding harmlessly into the soft earth. "Target sighted," shouted Sparky Harrison, the gunner. "It's a Panther G. Frontal armor is too thick, Sergeant." The Sherman M4A3, armed with the standard 75mm gun, was severely outmatched by the Panther. At 100 yards, the German armor could shrug off Kaczmarek's rounds, while the Panther could penetrate the Sherman from any angle. It was the fundamental inequality of tank warfare on the Western Front. "We don't go head-to-head, Sparky. We go ugly," Kaczmarek instructed, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "O'Malley, hold that reverse. Keep us angling slightly right, exposing maximum front plate to throw off the angle. Johnson, AP only." Private Walter Johnson, the loader, slammed another armor-piercing high explosive AF, round into the breach. AP loaded. The Panther's cannon began to swing, tracking the retreating Sherman. Kaczmarek knew he had maybe 5 seconds before the second decisive shot was fired. Sparky, ignore the hull. Target the track grousers, low and hard, 80 yards out. Now. This was the Gray Book engineering strategy. Kaczmarek was not trying to destroy the enemy tank. He was trying to break it. German track systems were notoriously brittle under concentrated fire, and Kaczmarek believed that if they couldn't penetrate the armor, they could at least immobilize the beast, turning its primary advantage speed and positioning into a liability. Harrison didn't question the command. He sighted low, aiming for the area where the track wrapped around the drive wheel and supporting grousers. Foosh! The Sherman's 75mm gun fired. The impact was immediate and unsatisfying. The round slammed into the track assembly area, but the heavy German steel held. Sparks flew, but the Panther didn't falter. Its turret locked onto the wrench. Impact. No effect, yelled Johnson. O'Malley, full stop. Forward, 20 yards, hard left. Kaczmarek commanded, doing the exact opposite of what the enemy expected. The Sherman lurched forward and spun, presenting its vulnerable side armor for only a flash. The German Panther fired its second round. The projectile screamed towards the Sherman, but the wrench was already moving into its next unexpected maneuver. The shell hit the ground where they had just been sitting, kicking up a fountain of earth and smoke. Kaczmarek needed to make the next shot count, or they were finished. He knew the Panther would now adjust its range and deliver a third fatal blow. He had already broken 3 Army rules of engagement in 1 minute, but he had bought 15 critical seconds. Sparky, load he. I said he, Johnson, load high explosive. Kaczmarek shouted, issuing the most unorthodox order of the engagement. Standard doctrine demanded AP rounds against enemy armor. Using high explosive was madness. High explosive, Sergeant? Against that armor? Johnson's voice was strained, thick with disbelief. Trust the damn wrench. We aren't aiming for the armor, Johnson. We're aiming for the vision ports and the gun breech. Load he now. We're blinding this son of a bitch. 11 hours, 18 minutes, and 45 seconds a.m. Johnson, despite his gut telling him this was a suicide order, slapped the he shell into the breech. The 75mm M48 high-explosive round was designed for infantry suppression or soft targets, not heavily armored tanks. Against the thick steel of a Panther, it would detonate harmlessly on impact, scattering shrapnel that wouldn't even scratch the paint. But Kaczmarek's strategy was based on engineering vulnerability, not penetration power. The Panther had several critical external components that were vital for its ability to fight, the primary being the commander's cupola optics and the gun mantlet housing. A large he blast directly on these points, while not penetrating the armor, could shock the crew, foul the optical system, or even splinter vital components like the gun's recoil mechanism. He loaded, Sergeant, Johnson confirmed, his voice tight. The German Panther was stationary now, having fully identified the wrench as the target. The high-velocity 75mm cannon was stable, locked onto the American tank. The gunner was moments away from firing. Sparky, sight slightly high, aim for the junction between the mantlet and the hull roof. Fire. 11 hours, 18 minutes, and 50 seconds A. The Sherman bucked again. The M48 he shell streaked across the 80 yards separating the tanks. It hit the Panther, not where the gun penetrated the mantlet, but a few inches above, right where the vision periscopes for the driver and radio operator were positioned. WHUMPH. The blast was loud but localized. Instead of the satisfying clang of armor being pierced, there was a deafening thud and a massive gout of black smoke and fire. Inside the Panther, the concussion was devastating. The delicate glass of the periscopes instantly shattered, turning the internal optics into glittering shrapnel. Though the armor was untouched, the crew was temporarily blinded, their vision of the outside world reduced to a flickering haze of smoke and splintered plastic. "Did we stop him?" asked Private First Class Robert Gunner Jones, the radio operator, whose primary role was spotting targets and managing external communications. "No, we blinded him," Kaczmarek corrected, watching the scene through the small periscope viewer. The Panther's massive turret was now swinging erratically, searching for the target it knew was there, but could no longer see clearly. The German commander was undoubtedly trying to pop the hatch to get visual confirmation, a move that Kaczmarek was banking on. "O'Malley, reverse. Put the engine through the floor. We need 200 yards, fast." The Sherman roared backward, throwing gravel and dirt. The erratic movement and the blinding HE shot had confused the German crew, buying Kaczmarek precious time, approximately 45 seconds of chaos, based on the documented drill times of a Panther crew recovering from shock. As the wrench reversed, Kaczmarek used the radio to call in a desperate, unauthorized maneuver. The 304th Platoon was supposed to be providing fire support for the main infantry advance 500 yards to the east. Kaczmarek was about to pull 2 other tanks from his unit into a death trap. "Hammer 2, Hammer 3, this is Hammer 1. Disregard section delta coordinates. I have a live PZV. He is blinded but functional. Need flanking support immediately. Route is the long ditch, 300 yards due west of the crossroads. Bring the heat." Hammer 2 was Staff Sergeant Leroy Miller, in the Mule, a Sherman armed with a high-velocity 76mm cannon, a much better anti-tank weapon. Hammer 3 was Staff Sergeant Ben Jurek in the Judge, a standard 75mm. The risk was immense. Pulling tanks out of an assigned defensive line exposed the entire flank of the infantry advance. But Kaczmarek knew that one intact Panther could halt an entire company of Shermans, and this one was currently parked directly in the path of the main advance. "Johnson, low to P again. We are going to hold his attention until Mule and Jury arrive," Kaczmarek ordered. 11 hours 19 minutes and 40 seconds A. The Panther commander, having recovered partially, ordered the gunner to fire blindly into the last known position of the Sherman, hoping to score a lucky hit. A shell ripped through the air, hitting a large oak tree 50 yards behind the wrench. Kaczmarek stopped the Sherman 200 yards away. He was now at the effective maximum range of his 75mm gun against the Panther's side armor, even with the better angle. He was bait. "Sparky, fire one more He round. Hit the gun barrel junction, force him to aim manually," Kaczmarek instructed. He wanted the German crew to become so focused on repairing their vision and maintaining the gun sight that they failed to notice the flanking maneuver taking place. The second He shell hit the German tank, this time striking the base of the gun naplet. The impact was enough to violently rattle the massive 75mm cannon, temporarily throwing off its zeroing and demanding a manual readjustment by the gunner, a critical delay Kaczmarek had engineered. He had bought time, but the Panther was not defeated. In fact, the 2 He hits had only enraged the crew. Through the few remaining undamaged vision slots, the German commander spotted the silhouette of the American tank, now seemingly stationary 200 yards down the lane. The Panther's turret began a slow, deliberate swing back toward the wrench. The German was taking his time, making sure the next shot was the last. Kaczmarek knew the flanking units had to arrive in the next minute. This was the moment of ultimate commitment. Inside the cramped turret, Kaczmarek looked at Sparky Harrison, his gunner, whose face was covered in sweat and grease. "Sparky, we take the next one if they shoot straight. Get ready for the counterfire. If we survive, we hit the weakest point." He pointed to a highly specific, nearly invisible spot on the front slope of the Panther, an area only known through detailed, unauthorized intelligence gathered by the Junkyard Dogs. The lower lip of the driver, S-hatch assembly, a slight weak spot created by the manufacturing process. It was a shot that required inhuman precision. If you want to know if the wrench survived what came next, hit that like button right now. It tells the algorithm this story matters and helps more people discover it. Subscribe for more untold World War II stories. Back to Staff Sergeant Kaczmarek and the impossible shot. 11 hours 20 minutes and 5 seconds A.M. The air within the wrench was thick with anticipation, fear, and the metallic scent of burnt propellant. Staff Sergeant Kaczmarek knew he was pushing his luck. Staying stationary at 200 yards was an invitation to disaster, but moving would disrupt Sparky Harrison's attempt at the impossible microscopic target, the weak seam around the lower driver's hatch of the Panther. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42 roared for the third time. The muzzle flash was blinding, followed instantly by the whistling shriek of the incoming round. It was aimed directly at the Sherman. "Brace! Hard left!" Kaczmarek yelled into the intercom. O'Malley swung the wheel microseconds before impact, causing the Sherman to slightly veer left and dip its front suspension. This minute movement, an instinctual reaction honed by weeks of brutal training, was enough. The German projectile did not penetrate the armor. Instead, it struck the upper lip of the Sherman's hull, the thickest piece of frontal armor, at an acute, glancing angle. The round, designed for penetration, momentarily adhered to the steel before violently ricocheting off with a sound like tearing mountains, soaring harmlessly into the sky. The concussion inside the wrench was still bone-jarring. Equipment flew, and the crew was slammed against the metal walls. Kaczmarek felt a searing pain in his shoulder from hitting the periscope housing. "Report! Hull intact." No penetration. "Just shock," O'Malley shouted back, his breathing ragged. "Load AP. Target is the hatch seam. Sparky, if you miss by an inch, we're done." "Don't rush," Kaczmarek commanded. He knew the Panther would need 5 seconds to reload. He had less time than that to execute the most precise shot of his life. 11 hours 20 minutes and 15 seconds A. Harrison centered his crosshairs, focusing with tunnel vision on the tiny, almost illusory seam. He had to account for the tank's shaking, the residual vibrations from the near miss, and the wind. The 75mm AP round, the standard M61, required a flawless perpendicular impact to defeat the Panther's heavy armor, even at a weak point. Just as Harrison was about to squeeze the trigger, a new, louder noise entered the equation, the rhythmic clank, clank, clank of rapidly moving tank tracks coming from the west. Hammer 2 and Hammer 3, the mule and the judge. They were moving fast along the dirt path Kaczmarek had specified, a sunken lane hidden by dense foliage. They were now in perfect flanking position, 50 yards to the German Panther's left side. "Sparky, wait." "Hold your fire," Kaczmarek roared. The German commander, focused on finishing the stationary wrench, had not yet detected the flanking attack. Hammer 2, the mule, armed with the superior 76mm high-velocity gun, immediately located the stationary Panther. Staff Sergeant Miller knew the protocol. Prioritize the kill. The 76mm M79 AP round stood a decent chance of penetrating the Panther's side armor, which was significantly thinner than the front. 11 hours 20 minutes and 30 seconds A. The mule fired. The 76mm projectile hit the Panther's left side hull, just above the second road wheel. This time, the sound was different. A heavy, ripping crunch. The round didn't ricochet. It punched straight through the side plating, vaporizing a section of the steel, and sending a catastrophic shower of molten metal and superheated fragments into the engine compartment and fighting interior. The effect was instantaneous and violent. A geyser of white-hot exhaust and black smoke erupted from the Panther's engine vents. The tank lurched, its tracks grinding to a halt. "Hit! We got him!" Harrison yelled, his tension immediately releasing. Kaczmarek, however, knew better. German tanks, especially Panthers, often took multiple killing blows. That round might have crippled the engine or hit the fuel, but the turret was still functional, and the crew was fighting back. Indeed, the Panther's turret, though smoking, began to rotate with surprising speed, swinging away from the crippled wrench and toward the source of the lethal blow, the mule. 11 hours 20 minutes and 45 seconds a.m. The German crew, desperate to eliminate the immediate threat, fired a frantic, uncalibrated shot. The projectile from the Panther missed the mule entirely, passing inches over the turret. Hammer 2, pull back, break cover. Kaczmarek ordered over the radio. Now was the moment. With the Panther fully committed and facing left, exposing its entire right flank to the wrench, Sparky, AP, right flank, hit the turret ring junction, maximum velocity. The turret ring, the circular mechanism that connects the massive turret to the hull, was a secondary weak spot. A high-velocity AP round hitting the thin vertical lip of the ring could jam the turret, or, if lucky, ignite the ammunition stowage inside. 11 hours 21 minutes and 0 seconds a. The wrench fired. The 75mm round struck the Panther's turret ring with precision, jamming the entire mechanism. The enormous turret immediately ceased its rotation, frozen awkwardly between its two opponents. Before the German crew could process this second crippling blow, Staff Sergeant Frank in the Judge, seeing the immobilized enemy tank, delivered the final decisive strike. Frank aimed for the main ammunition storage racks located on the right side of the hull. The 75mm AP round hit. There was a pause, a brief moment of silence, and then the German Panther erupted. The internal explosion, fueled by 79 high-explosive and armor-piercing rounds, blew the massive turret clean off the hull, tossing the heavy steel assembly 20 feet into the air before it crashed back down in a ruined pile of fire and twisted metal. The battle of the Percy crossroads was over. One Panther destroyed in under 3 minutes, thanks to 42 seconds of impossible field repair and 3 unorthodox shots. But Kaczmarek knew the sounds of combat attracted attention. The success of one German Panther meant there were likely more nearby. And he was right. As the smoke cleared, 2 new dark shapes appeared on the horizon, 500 yards away, bearing down on the immobilized Americans. 2 more Panthers. 11 hours 22 minutes and 0 seconds a.m. The sight of 2 more Panthers appearing from the northeast ridge was a psychological hammer blow. Kaczmarek's Unit 3 Shermans, one of them the less effective 75mm version, the Judge, and his own wrench, now heavily damaged and recently repaired under duress, was vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The flanking tactic had worked once, but relying on surprise against a now alert enemy was suicide. Hammer 2, Hammer 3, get back in the tree line. Disperse. Kaczmarek commanded over the radio. They know we're here. We need to reset the engagement. The mule and the Judge immediately reversed into the dense bocage, providing a curtain of foliage that complicated the enemy's sightlines. Kaczmarek, however, remained stationary. His earlier track repair, though successful, was temporary. The guide assembly was stressed, and attempting high-speed maneuvers now could result in a catastrophic track failure, immobilizing them permanently. O'Malley, keep the engine idling. We're going to hold position and act like we're too damaged to move, Kaczmarek whispered into the intercom. Johnson, load another AP. Sparky, get ready to fire smoke. We need obscuration. Kaczmarek's eyes scanned the battlefield, not for cover, but for raw materials. The smoking, burning husk of the first Panther lay 100 yards away, a grotesque monument to their narrow victory. To Kaczmarek, it wasn't a wreck. It was a mobile parts depot. The new Panthers, still 500 yards distant, were moving cautiously. They were clearly communicating, aware that the American Shermans had managed to eliminate their comrade. They would not repeat the mistake of engaging one-on-one. They were advancing side by side, maximizing their formidable frontal armor protection. 11 hours 23 minutes and 15 seconds a.m. The two German tanks stopped 450 yards out and stabilized their guns, preparing to engage from a safe distance. The 75mm KWK-42 had an effective range of over 2,000 meters, far superior to the Sherman's 75mm. This was an execution, not a fight. "Sparky, smoke now. Obscure the wreck, not us," Kaczmarek ordered. The Sherman smoke dischargers fired 2 shells, creating a thick, white cloud that billowed over the burning German tank. Kaczmarek needed to make the wreck appealing. He needed the enemy to focus on the immediate past, not the immediate future. "O'Malley, power down the main engine. Only auxiliary power. We need silence." The Sherman fell quiet. Kaczmarek unlatched his hatch, grabbing the massive, heavy pipe wrench and a coil of steel cable he always kept in the turret. He was going outside, back into the open field, toward the burning Panther wreck. "Sergeant, what the hell are you doing? You can't just walk out there." Harrison's voice cracked over the intercom. "I need parts, Sparky. The front wheel boogie on that wreck is intact, and it's better than what we have," Kaczmarek replied, already halfway out of the hatch. "And I need fuel. The fuel lines on the Panther are shielded. I'm going to strip their external auxiliary fuel tanks. If those 2 Panthers advance, you fire 1 AP around at the base of the turret of the closest one, then reverse immediately. You hear me?" "Yes, Sergeant, but that's suicide." "They're sighted in. They're looking at a motionless tank that just shot smoke. They think we're either finished or baiting them," Kaczmarek insisted, dropping onto the hull and then the ground. The heat radiating from the burning Panther was intense, and the smell of roasting German gasoline and oil was overwhelming. Kaczmarek sprinted in a low crouch toward the wreckage, the wrench clanking against his thigh. This was quintessential survival engineering, using the enemy's resources, even the remains of their dead, to keep his machine alive. He was running a 100-yard dash under the theoretical guns of 2 enemy tanks, all to steal spare parts and fuel. The 2 German Panthers, seeing the smoke and the apparent silence from the American position, began to advance slowly, closing the gap. They were down to 400 yards. Kaczmarek reached the wreck. The heat was scorching his uniform. He ignored the remains of the German crew visible in the smoke. He focused instantly on the technical objective. The intact auxiliary fuel tanks bolted near the Panther's engine bay and the relatively undamaged front suspension boogie. The German engineers, prioritizing high performance, had used highly durable components. Kaczmarek needed that durability. He went straight for the fuel tanks first. Using the massive pipe wrench, he furiously began twisting the locking nuts, applying superhuman force in the desperate knowledge that he had maybe 60 seconds before the German tanks realized the Sherman in the distance was playing dead. 30 seconds in, Kaczmarek had 1 tank unsecured. It was a heavy, cylindrical reserve fuel tank, holding maybe 50 liters of high-octane gasoline. He was not stealing fuel for his Sherman, which ran on diesel. He was stealing fuel for his plan. He looked up. The 2 Panthers were down to 350 yards. He could now see the details of their frontal plating and the precise angle of their cannons. They were preparing to fire. Kaczmarek had to improvise faster than ever before. He couldn't steal the boogie. He barely had time to get back alive. He hauled the heavy fuel tank by the handle, dragging it back toward the wrench, while his mind raced, formulating a deadly, explosive trap using the Germans' own gasoline. 11 hours, 24 minutes, and 20 seconds a.m. Kaczmarek stumbled the last few yards, hefting the 50-liter auxiliary fuel tank German high-octane gasoline back to the relative safety of the wrench's hull. He scrambled back into the driver's hatch, hauling the heavy canister into the cramped fighting compartment. "I need every spare canteen, every rag, and every stick of dynamite we have now." Kaczmarek barked, his face streaked with sweat and soot. He didn't wait for confirmation. He already had his plan. A massive improvised Molotov cocktail designed to negate the Panthers' greatest advantage, their thick frontal armor. Johnson and Harrison, though completely bewildered, reacted instantly. They rummaged through the stowage bins, pulling out 3 sticks of U.S. Army demolition dynamite, M1, a handful of field dressings, and 2 empty water canteens. "The Panthers are at 300 yards, Sergeant. They're stopping to shoot," O'Malley warned, his hands gripping the controls. "No time," Kaczmarek muttered, working with frantic precision. He emptied 1 canteen of water and quickly poured some of the precious German fuel into it. He soaked several rags and field dressings in the gasoline, creating large, highly flammable wicks. The plan was simple, reckless, and rooted in the fundamentals of materials science. He intended to use the high-octane gasoline, combined with the explosive force of the M1 dynamite, to create a focused, high-temperature fire on the Panther's weakest spot, the engine deck grills at the rear. However, hitting the engine deck from the front was impossible. Kaczmarek reached for a crate containing one of the most unorthodox modifications from the Gray Book, the lobster tail shells. These were standard 75mm He rounds that Kaczmarek's unit had crudely modified by welding small, aerodynamic stabilizing fins scavenged from destroyed German mortar fins onto the casing. These modifications did not improve accuracy, but they significantly increased the drag, causing the projectile to drop faster and act like a short-range mortar round rather than a standard direct fire shell. "Sparky, load a lobster tail. Set the trajectory for maximum elevation, minimum distance. We need the round to impact just 50 yards in front of us," Kaczmarek explained, pointing the muzzle toward the ground ahead. Harrison didn't argue. He knew that Kaczmarek was setting up an indirect fire pattern that would allow them to use their main gun to launch the crude explosive payload they were assembling. 11 hours 25 minutes and 0 seconds IM, the Panthers were now fully stopped at 300 yards. They both fired simultaneously. The noise inside the Sherman was deafening. The world outside turned into a blinding flash as 2 high-velocity 75mm shells screamed past the American tank. One round blew up a clump of earth 15 feet to the right. The other impacted a low stone wall behind them, scattering rubble violently. They were sighting in. The next volley would be lethal. Kaczmarek had to get the bomb outside. He quickly tied the dynamite sticks together, securing the gasoline-soaked rags around them. He then lashed the entire explosive bundle to the side of the German auxiliary fuel tank. He was creating a rudimentary shape charge designed not for penetration, but for instantaneous fuel dispersion and ignition. "O'Malley, I need a clear field of fire for 50 yards ahead. Pull us left, 10 feet, then stop." As the wrench moved, Kaczmarek frantically tied the steel cable around the German fuel tank. He was going to manually launch the bomb, using the main gun as a counterweight. 11 hours 25 minutes and 35 seconds AM. The 2 Panthers began calculating their next shots. They were closing the range. Kaczmarek finished lashing the cable to the massive pipe wrench, which he was using as an anchor on the hull. He was aiming to use the momentum of the shell, leaving the barrel to quickly yank the bomb he had just created out of the loader's hatch and into the kill zone. "Johnson, open the loader's hatch. Stand clear." Johnson manually cranked the heavy hatch open. Kaczmarek shoved the German fuel tank bomb onto the lip of the opening. "Sparky, fire the lobster tail. Trajectory 50 yards out. Go." 11 hours 26 minutes and 0 seconds A. The Sherman fired the modified He shell. It lofted high and short, striking the ground exactly 50 yards away. At the exact microsecond of the recoil, Kaczmarek gave a massive wrenching pull on the cable. The force of the tank's recoil acted as a quick release, yanking the heavy fuel tank forward. The bomb flew end over end over the short distance, landing precisely where the modified shell had exploded, creating a small cloud of dirt. It was now placed perfectly between the two advancing Panthers. Kaczmarek slammed the hatch shut. "O'Malley, reverse, full speed. We are out of here." The Sherman, despite the stressed track guide, roared backward as the two German Panthers, still focused on the stationary spot, continued their advance. They were now at 250 yards and closing rapidly, oblivious to the fact that they were driving directly into a mine of their own fuel and explosives. 11 hours 26 minutes and 45 seconds A. The lead Panther, designated PZ, V Alpha, rolled directly over the concealed explosive charge. The heavy suspension of the 45-ton tank crushed the dynamite, triggering the detonators. The explosion was far from the clean, penetrating blast of an anti-tank round. It was a massive, concussive humph as the 50 liters of German fuel atomized instantly and ignited. A searing column of fire erupted from the ground, engulfing the underside of the Panther. Crucially, the explosion was positioned perfectly to engulf the tank's thin belly armor and the exposed cooling grills located directly above the point of impact. The intense, superheated flames immediately penetrated the ventilation slots and rushed into the engine compartment. PZ, V Alpha was instantly crippled, its engine burning fiercely, flames licking out from the rear deck. The second Panther, PZ, V Beta, driven by a quick-thinking commander, veered hard left to avoid the burning wreck, exposing its vulnerable side armor to the unseen American Shermans lurking in the tree line. Kaczmarek, watching the resulting inferno, transmitted a grim instruction. Hammer 2, Hammer 3, targets acquired. Beta is exposed. Fire for effect. Priority target is the engine of the burning one. Finish him. 11 hours 27 minutes and 0 seconds A.M. The engagement was now at point-blank range for the flanking Shermans. Staff Sergeant Miller, the mule, armed with the 76 millimeters, was positioned perfectly. The secondary Panther, PZ, V Beta, had executed a desperate evasive maneuver, swinging its massive turret back toward the burning wreck of PZ, V Alpha, and exposing its broad, thin side armor to Miller's position. Miller did not hesitate. The muzzle of the mule's 76 millimeters cannon spat fire, FWOOSH. A 76 millimeters AP round, traveling at high velocity, struck PZ, V Beta directly in the transmission housing on the right side. Unlike the front armor, the 40 millimeter side plating offered minimal resistance. The shell tore through the steel, vaporizing the gearbox and spraying the fighting compartment with shrapnel and white-hot metal. PZ, V Beta immediately shuddered, stopped dead, and the crew began to bail out, streaming from the hatches a clear sign of a crippling hit. "2 is down. Excellent shot, Mule," Kaczmarek shouted over the radio, already maneuvering the wrench back into the combat zone. But the fight wasn't over. The first Panther, PZ-V Alpha, though its engine was an inferno fueled by its own high-octane gasoline, was not fully disabled. Its turret was still functional, and the crew, now desperately fighting internal fires, knew they had to take out the nearest threat. The German commander, half-blinded and choked by smoke, locked onto the exposed flank of the Judge Hammer 3, who had just advanced to cover the mule. 11 hours 27 minutes and 35 seconds A.M.P.Z. V Alpha, its rear deck engulfed in roaring flames, managed to fire one last desperate shot. The round hit the Judge's right side boogie wheels. It wasn't a killing blow, but the impact violently ripped the track assembly apart, leaving the Judge immobilized and listing dangerously. "Hammer 3 is out. We're tracked. Repeat, we are tracked." Jurek's panicked voice crackled over the radio. Kaczmarek reacted instantly. He saw the immobilized Judge and the burning PZ, V Alpha, now stationary and committed to finishing the American tank. This was a critical failure point. If they lost the judge, PZ-V Alpha could hold the entire crossroads until German reinforcements arrived. O'Malley, full speed forward. Put us directly between the burning Panther and the judge. This was pure, unadulterated madness. Kaczmarek was driving his already damaged Sherman straight into the path of an enraged, burning enemy tank, using his own hull as a shield for Jurek's crippled machine. 11 hours 27 minutes and 50 seconds a.m. The wrench roared into position, pulling up 40 yards from the burning PZ. V Alpha presenting its thickest frontal armor to the German gun. Kaczmarek knew he could only rely on the psychological intimidation of the extreme close range. The German gunner would be under intense pressure. Johnson, AP. Sparky, aim for the gun barrel this time. We must disable his ability to fire. PZ. V Alpha fired at point-blank range. The 75mm shell hit the wrench's front plate with a terrifying metal screeching impact. The Sherman shuddered violently. Shrapnel sprayed into the air. Impact. Penetration failed. We held, Harrison shouted, his ears ringing. The German shell had hit Kaczmarek's thickest section of armor. A lucky break. Or maybe the crew inside PZ. V Alpha were too distracted by the raging engine fire to aim properly. Before the German crew could reload, Kaczmarek delivered his calculated, lethal counterpunch. 11 hours 28 minutes and 5 seconds a.m. The wrench fired its 75mm AP round, not at the hull, but directly at the muzzle of the Panther's cannon. It was a shot designed to eliminate the threat entirely. The round struck the gun tube a few feet from the massive muzzle brake. It didn't penetrate, but the force of the impact violently warped the barrel's steel. The damage was immediate and irreversible. PZ. V Alpha's primary weapon was now completely unusable. Johnson, load he, full salvo, Kaczmarek commanded. We are going to make that fuel fire spread. Kaczmarek now used the Sherman's gun to methodically destroy the German secondary systems. 3 high explosive rounds slammed into the Panther's engine deck and ventilation grills, ripping the superstructure open and turning the fire into an inferno. The PZ, V Alpha, was utterly consumed by fire. The crew finally abandoned the tank, collapsing onto the ground, severely burned. 3 Panthers destroyed by Kaczmarek's 3-tank unit. Total engagement time, 11 minutes. The cost was 1 damaged tank, the wrench now relying on a temporary fix, and 1 immobilized tank. The judge, the immediate threat was gone, but the sound of the explosions had certainly alerted every German unit within a 5-mile radius. Kaczmarek had to get his tanks repaired and moving, or the crossroads victory would be fleeting. He now had 2 high-priority maintenance jobs, fixing his own temporary track and replacing the judge as entire track and bogie assembly, all while expecting imminent counterattack. Kaczmarek looked at the nearest wreck, the recently disabled PZ V Beta, and smiled grimly. O'Malley, kill the engine. Johnson, grab the welding kit. We are going shopping. The Germans just donated a full set of spare parts. Survival engineering was about to reach its peak. 11 hours 35 minutes and 0 seconds a. The chaotic energy of the battle subsided, replaced by the methodical, urgent work of frontline maintenance. Kaczmarek's first order of business was triage. The Mule Hammer II had sustained only light cosmetic damage and was positioned as a covering guard, its 76mm cannon trained on the distant ridges. The Judge Hammer III was fully immobilized, its track mangled and its forward bogie assembly severely damaged by the 75mm shell impact. Kaczmarek himself immediately tackled his temporary repair on the wrench. The 42-second fix had held, but the track tension was dangerously loose, and the custom-welded guide was flexing. He spent 90 seconds hammering the guide back into position, reinforcing it with a salvaged piece of sheet metal taken from the nearby stone wall. Using a portable acetylene torch and a battery-powered welder, all non-standard equipment carried in the wrench as oversized storage bins. His focus then shifted entirely to the immobilized the judge. "We need a full track section and a new boogie assembly. Fast," Kaczmarek informed Staff Sergeant Jurek, the commander of the judge. "We are taking them from Beta, PZV Beta." The Panther, crippled by the mule's 76mm round, was still smoking, but had not burned, meaning its external components were largely intact. The Junkyard Dogs, led by Kaczmarek, now executed a process they called organ harvesting. The crew of the wrench and the judge worked in a furious, synchronized effort, stripping vital parts from the German wreck only 60 yards away. The complexity of the German interleaved road wheels and heavy tracks made the work exponentially harder than repairing a simple Sherman. 11 hours 45 minutes and 0 seconds a.m. They had a problem. The Panther's track components were massive, heavy, and designed with metric precision. They were incompatible with the American Sherman track system, which used different gauge steel and imperial measurements. They couldn't simply replace a Sherman boogie with a Panther boogie. "Sergeant, the axles are completely different." "We can't bolt this on," Jurek pointed out, gesturing at the heavy German component. Kaczmarek stared at the massive, durable German road wheel and the heavy, thick track sections. He couldn't use them to repair the judge, but he could use them to reinforce it. "We don't need to replace the Sherman boogie, Jurek," Kaczmarek said, an idea forming in his mind, rooted in the gray book doctrine of creating composite armor. "We need to shield the replacement boogie we do have. We're going to weld the German road wheel onto the Sherman as side armor as applet plating." This was an act of extreme improvisation. They would use the massive, heavy German road wheel as extra spaced armor over the damaged, irreparable hull section. Johnson and Private Jones pulled out the heavy welding cables and connected the generator, a noisy, cumbersome process that increased their risk profile significantly. While the welding was prepared, Kaczmarek worked on the track itself. He instructed Jurek's crew to pull the temporary track from the stowage bins, but to use the German track pin and end connector salvaged from the PZV Beta. The German pins were made of higher quality, thicker steel. 11 hours 55 minutes and 0 seconds a.m. The welding began a continuous, blinding arc of white light against the green steel of the Sherman. Kaczmarek and Jurek, wearing heavy protective gloves, manually held the massive German road wheel against the judge's side hull, focusing the arc welding directly onto the surrounding steel plating. The goal was crude, permanent attachment, not aesthetic finish. The noise of the generator and the welding was deafening, a direct announcement to any nearby German patrols that the American tanks were stationary and vulnerable. They were gambling that the recent loss of 3 heavy tanks would deter an immediate counterattack, giving them a small window, the window of maintenance. The German road wheel, now crudely affixed to the hull of the judge, provided nearly 3 inches of extra hardened steel protection for the lower chassis, specifically protecting the repair they were about to perform on the boogie mount. It was a visual modification that transformed the appearance of the Sherman, giving it a brutal, improvised aesthetic. 12 hours 10 minutes and 0 seconds p.m. The welding was complete. The massive wheel was fused to the Sherman. Now for the track replacement. They used the repaired boogie housing and the new track segment. Kaczmarek made sure to replace the standard Sherman track pin with the sturdier German pin. "That track isn't going anywhere," Kaczmarek declared, wiping sweat from his brow. In just 35 minutes, under the shadow of 3 burning enemy tanks, the Junkyard Dogs had repaired 1 tank and resurrected a second, making it structurally stronger than it had been hours earlier. But just as Kaczmarek ordered the judge to test the track movement, the radio crackled. It wasn't the voice of their unit. It was the frantic, broken static of a forward infantry observer. "Hammer 1, This is Dogwood 3. We have heavy German mechanized infantry advancing rapidly from the woods, 600 yards northwest. They are supported by an armored car. They are coming straight for the crossroads. The window of maintenance was closed. 3 tanks were fixed, but the fight was far from over, and this time the enemy was bringing infantry, the mortal enemy of stationary tanks. 12 hours 12 minutes and 0 seconds p.m. The threat of mechanized infantry posed a unique danger. Tank armor provided excellent protection against direct fire, but infantry carrying Panzerfausts, recoilless anti-tank weapons, or magnetic mines could easily neutralize a tank in close quarters, especially if the tanks were operating without accompanying Allied foot soldiers. Kaczmarek, Jurek, and Miller were now facing a rapid counterattack designed to reclaim the strategically vital crossroads. The 3 Shermans, the Wrench, the Mule, and the Judge, the latter reinforced by scavenged German armor, rumbled into position behind the smoking husk of PZ. V Alpha. Kaczmarek chose this position deliberately. The wrecks provided excellent cover and complicated the enemy's approach, forcing them to navigate through debris and the intense heat of the burning gasoline. O'Malley, keep the front of the Wrench facing the wrecks. We use them as a shield, Kaczmarek commanded. Sparky, load canister shot. Johnson, get the machine guns ready. We're going to need sustained fire. Canister rounds, essentially giant shotgun shells for the main gun, were devastating against infantry, firing hundreds of metal pellets in a wide cone. It was the perfect counter to a coordinated infantry assault. 12 hours 15 minutes and 0 seconds p.m. The German unit came into view. 2 platoons of Panzer Grenadier, mechanized infantry, roughly 60 men, supported by a heavy SD KFZ 234 halves Puma armored car, armed with a 50 mm cannon. The Puma, fast and deadly, could flank the Shermans while the infantry swarmed the position. Kaczmarek immediately identified the Puma as the primary threat, given its speed and high rate of fire. Hammer 2, focus on the armored car. That 76 mm is our best chance against the Puma's sloped armor. Fire on my mark. The infantry, however, was already fanning out, using the thick hedgerows for cover, preparing to launch their Panzerfaust attacks. 12 hours 15 minutes and 30 seconds p.m. The German Puma armored car, relying on its speed, attempted a wide looping maneuver to flank the Shermans from the southwest. Staff Sergeant Miller in the Mule tracked it perfectly. Hammer 2, fire, Kaczmarek yelled. The Mule fired its 76 mm gun. The high-velocity round struck the Puma in its thin, angled side armor, punching straight through. The armored car instantly spun out of control and flipped into a ditch, its mission abruptly terminated. The infantry assault continued undeterred. The loss of the Puma was a heavy blow, but the Panzer Grenadier were elite soldiers. They began firing machine guns and rifles, attempting to suppress the American tanks, allowing the Panzerfaust teams to close in. 12 hours 16 minutes and 0 seconds p.m. The Germans were now 100 yards out, launching their first salvo of Panzerfausts. These were terrifying, single-shot anti-tank rockets capable of penetrating the Sherman side and rear armor. 2 Panzerfausts flew toward the Wrench. Kaczmarek saw them coming. Hard turn left, smoke screen. The first rocket missed, flying over the turret. The second struck the Wrench's side hull, dangerously close to the rear engine compartment. Boom. The heat, high-explosive anti-tank warhead detonated. But Kaczmarek had prepared for this. During the first major lull in the Normandy campaign, he had instructed his crew to stack every available piece of scavenged German plating, spare track links, and even old truck tires onto the vulnerable rear and side engine compartments, a crude but effective form of spaced and composite armor, directly copied from combat reports of Soviet T-34 modifications. The Panzerfaust round detonated against this layered, improvised armor. The energy was largely absorbed by the junk steel and rubber, which deflected the plasma jet. Minimal damage. "We held," Harrison shouted triumphantly. "They're too close." Sparky canister, aimed just over the top of the hedgerow, 75 yards. 12 hours 16 minutes and 45 seconds p.m. The wrench's 75mm main gun roared, but instead of a single projectile, it unleashed a massive spraying blast of steel pellets. The effect on the concentrated German infantry hiding behind the hedgerow was devastating. The pellets shredded the foliage and tore through the enemy positions, killing dozens instantly and sending the survivors scrambling for cover. Jurek and the judge, backed up by his newly applied German road wheel armor, joined the barrage, firing canister rounds into the remaining infantry. The combination of the heavy steel road wheel applique and the overwhelming firepower transformed the judge from a crippled liability into a stationary bunker. The crossroads had become a slaughterhouse. 12 hours 18 minutes and 0 seconds p.m. The organized German assault broke. The surviving Panzer Grenadier, facing the combined fire of 3 Shermans and the psychological shock of watching their anti-tank rockets fail against improvised armor, began a disorganized retreat back toward the northwest woods. Kaczmarek had neutralized 3 heavy tanks and a mechanized infantry company, securing the crossroads for the American infantry advance, all thanks to 42 seconds of emergency maintenance and an encyclopedic knowledge of how to use scavenged parts. "O'Malley, advance 50 yards. We need to clear this area and link up with Dogwood 3, Kaczmarek commanded. The mission was a success. The technical ingenuity of the Junkyard Dogs had paid off, turning the remains of their enemy into their salvation. But Kaczmarek knew that the battle was merely a localized victory. The war in the Bocage was a continuous, brutal grind of attrition and constant mechanical failure. His job was never truly finished. He was the engineer guarding the gates of hell. Kaczmarek looked at the salvaged German wheel welded onto the judge. It was crude, ugly, and against every army manual. But it was the reason Jurek was alive. This was the true face of World War II survival engineering. 12 hours 25 minutes and 0 seconds p.m. As the smoke cleared from the Percy crossroads, the main body of the American 3rd Armored Division Infantry began to arrive, filtering through the dense hedgerows and securing the key intersection. They found 3 Shermans, heavily scarred and smelling strongly of diesel and scorched German gasoline, standing guard over 4 destroyed German armored vehicles, 3 Panthers and 1 Puma. Staff Sergeant Frank Kaczmarek climbed out of the wrench to meet the incoming major, his uniform torn and covered in oil and soot. He looked utterly exhausted, but satisfied. The major, who had witnessed the furious, brief exchange, simply stared at the 2 tanks, the wrench, with its barely holding track, and the judge, with the massive German road wheel crudely welded to its side. "Sergeant Kaczmarek," the major said, "I don't even want to know how you managed this repair, let alone the combat results. I'm filing this as effective utilization of field resources under extreme duress. Do you have any casualties?" "No, sir. Minor burns, but all hands operational. The judge will need a full inspection, but she run. We are ready to move out," Kaczmarek reported. He didn't mention the 42-second fix, the improvised HE charge, or the lobster tail shells. Some things were better kept in the Gray Book. The legend of the 304th Provisional Field Maintenance Platoon, the Junkyard Dogs, grew rapidly across the 3rd Armored Division. They became the go-to unit for impossible repairs, often operating directly under fire, stripping the dead to save the living. Kaczmarek's ability to see a battlefield not as a site of destruction, but as a storage facility for replacement parts, fundamentally changed how his division managed attrition warfare. Frank Kaczmarek survived the brutal fighting of the European theater, earning the Silver Star for his actions at Percy and many subsequent clashes where his engineering ingenuity saved not only his crew, but entire platoons. He proved that speed and mechanical audacity, born from the improvisation of the unwanted, could defeat German technological superiority. His motto, echoing the spirit of the Junkyard Dogs, was often quoted by his men. If the Army didn't issue it, it means it's worth stealing, fixing, or inventing. His legacy is not just one of survival, but of transformation, turning broken machines and broken rules into tactical advantages. The improvised armor, the quick fixes, the illegal modifications. They were all a testament to the fact that in World War II, victory often belonged not to the highest-ranking officer or the greatest engineer, but to the determined mechanic willing to risk everything for 42 seconds of impossible work. If this story moved you, don't just click away. Hit like, hit subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and whether anyone in your family served in World War II, especially in the U.S. Armored Divisions in the Normandy campaign. You are part of the reason these men aren't erased from history. Staff Sergeant Frank Kaczmarek and the Junkyard Dogs paid the price so others could advance. All we're asked to do is remember, like, comment, and share to keep their story alive. Never forget.